There's a place where discoveries are made, where directions are set, where hopes become real. And your next big step will take you there. The future, your future. You have real questions. What should I study? Can I afford it? Will I get a job? How can I make a real difference? There's space to find real answers. Discover your gifts, think deeply, look wide, create, worship, innovate, lead, and uncover what it means to reflect the love of Jesus Christ in every career and calling. This is your future. This is your calling. This is your place. Come to learn, find a community, deepen your faith. And this is the time, right now. Step toward what's next and listen closely. Your future is calling.
Hey everybody, this is Lucas here hosting this episode of Real Talk. We are back for another exciting episode. This happens to be the first one we're recording in 2025, so not sure when you'll be listening to this, but nonetheless, it is always a relevant discussion when we are talking about post-secondary education. To go or not to go? That is the question. So on today's panel, I'm hosting, of course, and then we have our beloved editor, John Dykstra, and our executive director, Mark Penninga, from Reformed Perspective. So they're joining us. We all have varying different perspectives on the value of post-secondary education, the various different paths you can go on. So we're going to be debating the merits of a given path, whether that's going to a post-secondary university option in a secular university, Christian, a college, trade school, gap year, moving away from home, staying close to home, saving money, directing to the workforce. There's, as I said, there's so many options. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to share maybe just a little bit of my story, my take on this, and then I'll throw it over to the gentleman, and they can weigh in, and we'll go from there. So on to go or not to go, from my personal point of view, I think most people should not go to university, regardless if it's Christian or secular. I would say especially secular. It's mostly a waste of time, I would say, for probably up to 75% of people. That would be kind of what I've seen. The university system is very woke. There's not a lot of good material left there. There is some. I'm not saying there isn't any. But that combined with the amount of money you need to spend to get a degree, and largely for me, I think the opportunity cost. So when I was looking at this, not that many moons ago, I suppose, but when I was 18, I chose to not go to university, and I opted to take a gap year. And I did an internship in Ottawa, which is actually where I first met Mark, I believe, coincidentally, during his time at ARPA. So I did a year in Ottawa working in Parliament Hill, and that was a very formative year for me as an 18-year-old. I had to learn to work in an adult setting. I had to figure out the way to live on my own. Well, I live with a few guys, but moving out of the house at that age and moving 5-6 hours away from home was a very valuable experience for me, and definitely taught me how to be an adult and how to live in the working world. And I think I gained a tremendous amount of interpersonal skills during that time. And I think if I had just gone to university and stayed in the system, quote unquote, I don't think I would have grown in that year the way I did working in the workforce. So personally, that worked well for me. Then I moved on to do a 2-year sales and marketing diploma back home, which was pretty cost effective. So that was nice. Thanks again, Mom and Dad. Appreciate that. And also courtesy of Kathleen Wynne, who was giving out a lot of money at that time for education. So not that I'm a proponent of that necessarily, but anyways, that's a sidebar. So I did a 2-year sales marketing diploma there and got a lot of value out of that. But even so, I would say looking back, could I have done without it? Should I have just gone into business 2 years earlier? Perhaps. But regardless, I had an opportunity to join forces with Tyler and the business he had just started. And now being 6 years down the road on the other side of this, being an employer, I have some thoughts too on, I think, the value of education. Like typically we're not hiring engineers, but we look at hiring people who have the character, first of all, to do the job, and then secondary, the skill set. And then I would say third or even further down the rung is educational requirements. So that's kind of the perspective I'm coming from. Again, I'm not saying there's no room for university education. Certainly in the STEM fields, it makes a lot of sense. But on the whole, I think a lot of people waste their time in a university, and they could be learning a lot more valuable skills in the workforce. So that's kind of where I land on it. So I don't know if John, you want to weigh in, and then we'll go to Mark after that.
Yeah, I'm not coming to right angles against what you're saying. It might even be fairly closely aligned, but I spent about 7 years in post-secondary, and I will say I use it today in the sense of understanding how smart people can be dumb, how the learned leaders of this country can have things completely wrong. Like, I learned a lot of negative lessons in post-secondary, and I paid a lot of money to learn them. And I do wonder if there's other ways I could have used my time and used my money. I did have a productive year in journalism, but it was a 2-year program. I had one good year. I also found out from my prof at the time that before universities and colleges had started offering journalism degrees and journalism diplomas, I think I said I took an education degree, but I took a journalism diploma. Before post-secondary options for journalism degrees and diplomas came into place, they would have at the big papers a 2-month internship before you could start writing for them. 2 months of training. Once those 4-year degrees and 2-year diplomas became available, then that they knocked that down to an absolute requirement. They wouldn't look at anybody who didn't have one of them because it saved them 1 month of training. So you put in 4 years, it saves them 1 month. Well, thank you, government, for making these journalism programs accessible and available. You've wasted 4 years of my life. So I'm not against them altogether. I do find that they are a very expensive way of seeking to find yourself if you're not going there for a specific purpose. I did find out that I had writing talents at university. I didn't know that until my first year English class. That was life-changing for me. But that is one of the, I had 2 wonderful profs in there, and I can't say that about too many of the other profs that I had.
What about you, Mark? I know you've had a large range throughout your life consistently of continuing education as well. So what was, take us through kind of your experience and what you've sort of learned along the way?
I wouldn't have ever expected that I would have gone to many different types of post-secondary options, studies. And it was a case of one at a time, just taking the next step that's in front of you and trying to walk. Each of us tries to walk by faith, I think. And then the Lord opens up another door and you decide at that point to go through it. I would say I would grant both of you the argument that post-secondary options aren't what they were today. They aren't the same as what it was 20 years ago or 30 or 40 years ago. We're living in a different world, and that's why we need to have this discussion. And at the same time, I do want to make the pitch for people of all ages to push themselves when it comes to getting educated, to push ourselves out of our comfort zones. And I think I've experienced that it's really hard to do that unless you enroll in a program. I've enjoyed various types of experiences as well. I love podcasts. I love reading books. The difference when you actually sign up for a program, an educational program, is it involves commitments. It involves you have to have an essay in or a report in by a particular date. You have to engage with other students. You have to make a presentation. You have to write a thesis, all sorts of outcomes. And when we're forced to do that, especially in settings that aren't normal, that we're not necessarily naturally comfortable in, so maybe a secular setting or with people out of disciplines that are very different than what we're used to, I think that's so helpful for us to learn and to grow. And one of the deficiencies that we're witnessing in culture today is a lot of people who as scripture says, gather around them whatever their itching ears want to hear. So they subscribe to the social media platforms with friends that have similar viewpoints. They listen to podcasts that give opinions that they really like. They subscribe to YouTube channels that parrot a lot of their same opinions. And education is so much more than that. So I look back on my life so far, and I thank God for it ended up being 8 different types of post-secondary institutions that I went through. I thank God for each of them. Now, that said, the one other thing I'll add just to speak to what both of you said is, if you're just going to go into education for its own sake, it's probably going to be a waste of time, and return on investment will be deplorable. So you do need to have direction. You really need to have ambition of, how would God have me use what he's given me? So talents, experience, background, how would he have me use these for his kingdom? And if someone listening to this podcast is a young woman, for example, and she has decided that God would like her to be a mom, a faithful mother, a loving wife, then I'd say, by all means, like, do feel no pressure at all to pursue post-secondary studies. It's not a goal in and of itself, but for many of us, it can be a very helpful goal, even when you're at now age, for me, mid 40s. So at later stages in life, to be open to considering going to a post-secondary option, because it's become far easier than ever before to enroll in something online or part-time. Yeah, highly recommend that.
And just to clarify, you're not limiting that to universities, right? There, like some of the things that you went to were, I'm thinking of the Colson Center.
For sure. Yeah,
Hence, but not university.
that's right. Even with Reform Perspective, we batted around the idea of some sort of Reform Perspective Academy, because nowadays it's not that hard to start a training program and to interact with colleagues, classmates, and others online virtually. So yeah, I did a midlife training program a few years ago that was 2-year diploma, just helping Christian leaders to ensure that their second half, they don't decline, but rather, and not just maintain, but the idea is to even improve, that you flourish in your second half. And the other program, the Colson Fellows, which is a worldview training program from the Colson Center, highly recommend it. I've plugged it in the magazine as well, but that would be suitable for almost all the listeners. If you're like Real Talk, and you're looking for some meaty, substantial program, it's growing in Canada as well, and it culminates in a conference at the end of 1 year. It's rigorous, it's excellent, sharpens the mind. It's really, really good.
Wonderful. Yeah, I think just building off what you said there, Mark, like the importance of continued education. I don't think that can be understated. Like, obviously, we all want to keep learning, and you want to be a lifelong learner. It doesn't stop once you get out of school, but enrolling in some of those programs, I'm not against university. I think that you could do a nice program via university on the side, but there is also like just like you say, Colson Center, but there's a multitude of options out there online nowadays. There's just a tremendous amount of resources at like reasonable cost too, like that you're not breaking the bank and spending big money on a degree, and you can work your main job and also do some education on the side. I guess to speak to what you said there earlier too about the accountability side of it, I think you have to take that personal responsibility to make sure you're actually doing the course. And I guess if we were to make kind of the bull case for university, is that there's a bit of that pressure. All right, I've slapped down thousands of dollars. This is what I'm doing with my time. Like, I better actually do this. Although even that doesn't necessarily make people go to class and do all their assignments still. So that's not always still going to work. But I guess listening to what both of you had said there, and getting your opinion as guys who've been around a touch longer than I have, to me, I see this issue as there's 2 ways to look at it. So there's kind of the historical view of go to school, typically university, college, as a pathway forward for your career to progress. If you don't do that, you will not make enough money, or you will be stuck doing a job you don't enjoy because you didn't go to school. That was kind of and still is to a degree, a prevailing narrative in our culture, in our Western culture, for sure. So there's that, and then there's also just the pure education side of, no, you should do this. There are things you should learn. It's good for in and of itself. And I think, well, I guess I would have two questions on that. One, do you see that attitude changing in terms of the practical side, in terms of gaining employment, higher employment, let's say, with that level of education? So that would be the historical question I would have for you both. And then two, do you think that educational component of the value of it, can you achieve that elsewhere in a more meaningful way? Maybe go to Mark and then back to John.
Great questions, Lucas. And I'd say yes, the change has been very real. I see it in my own community here. If you want to go to university, you have to leave town generally, unless you're doing it online. And it's a long distance away. And what's happening is far more young people are going into the trades. Like when you see the graduates at the end of the school year in grade 12 and they share their plans, I find it striking how few plan to go to traditional post-secondary institutions to pursue something like a Bachelor of Arts or a Bachelor of Science, which was much more common probably when John and I first went through our post-secondary studies. So I think that's declining substantially in popularity, partly because it's understood, well recognized that it's quite woke, can be quite challenging, and there's very few Christian options that are good. But I think at the same time, my heart goes out to those who have to. It's a necessary step. You have to go through an undergraduate degree to become a teacher or to become a lawyer, to become a pastor. So many other realms. It's like it's a necessary 4 years, and not always that you have to hold your nose and get through it, but that's where we're trying to get through here. I think with this discussion too is when you have to do it, how do you do it so that you get the most out of it that you can and that you stay faithful while you're doing it?
Yeah. To the practical side, in the past, it was that not very many people had degrees. You got a degree, you got a high paying job. It was almost kind of an automatic thing. I don't know if that was even true by the time I got to it, but it was true for my parents' generation. And so that was still a really strong impetus. And now you hear about so many people who get a degree and can't find anything in their field. So now it becomes a piece of paper that proves that you had the stick-to-itiveness to get through 4 years. But what if you had just spent 4 years showing that with work history that could have done the same thing and brought in money? So it is a different world, but there are things that can only be known through study. So if you know what you want, then what a wonderful opportunity to be in a culture where we're generally rich enough to be able to set aside that time and that money to go out and study. You kind of asked an education for its own sake question a little bit, and I think there is such a thing as trying to find out what you're good at. I will say, in my own case, I found out I was a good writer in first year university, in large part because I wasn't taking high school seriously, and so it was a great benefit to me. I encountered a couple of profs that really drove that home for me and showed it to me. But I think my high school teachers could have made that point to me if I had been paying attention. So it's education for its own sake is it's just not the only place you can do it. And I don't know if you want to go there for that, if we're talking, general secular education. I'd rather listen to Simon Sinek. He's not a Christian, but I just mean if I'm interested in business, I'll go listen to business talkers. If I'm interested in philosophy, I'll go check out some Christian philosophers. If you're just looking for education for its own sake, we live in a world of options nowadays, and including the kind of programs you can sign into, like Mark was talking about.
Quick anecdote to what John was saying. In my last job, I had to review applications for anybody who wanted to work for ARPA. It was, and So we got all sorts of applications and filled all sorts of positions. I don't know how many people I was responsible for recommending for hire, many, dozens. And what struck me through that whole process is how the education part on the resume meant so little, so little. The work experience and character meant so much, to the point where some staff were hired without any post-secondary studies, and I think the public wouldn't really know which of the staff has more of the studies. That said, I definitely do see a correlation between those who have more studies and when it comes to the ability to articulate thoughts on paper, like to write very well. The higher the level of education seems to correlate with that.
Yeah, that's a good point too. The ability to articulate and to write well, to speak well, that has always been one of the key, I think, yeah, strengths of higher education is molding students to be able to articulate. So we are, yeah, not to double back on my original statement, but we do have to be careful that we don't lose that. Like, you can't just consume content and become a good speaker, or become a great speaker, or become a great writer. You need to practice that as well. So that's where that discipline of having a course, at least, like you talked about, Mark, in your example with the Colson Center, at least you're held accountable that way, right? So, yeah. So to go back to what I was saying earlier, though, if we take the typical situation, so you have a high school senior, 17, 18, whatever, they're coming out of high school, they need to make a decision, they're whatever it is, January, February, grade 12. You got to look around, you got to apply for different universities or colleges or trade programs. I would say the majority of kids don't know what they want to do. They might have an inkling in a certain direction. They might have certain skills that they recognize, but they're not sure they can make a career out of it. So if we take that as the typical case, what would each of you say to that person? If they don't have a strong inkling of where they would like to go, what would you recommend they do with their time coming out of high school? And let's assume that they have the academic ability to do anything in this range. Like, they could go trades, they could go university, they just don't know. John.
Yeah. Start talking to the people around you and ask what they think where your talents may lie. Start seeking out friends who have recently graduated and asking them about the jobs that they've taken on. Seek out older mentors and even just explore. This might sound like, oh, I'm going to go talk to an old person and is he going to have time for me? He'll have time for you. Go ask him what kind of opportunities he can see out there, maybe what kind of people he might employ in the business he has. Seek mentors, essentially. And then there's also, once you explore what's next to you, then maybe you start looking online. But I wouldn't start looking online. That's just a morass, right? It's a random morass. Talk to the people near you and explore that. And then if you can start narrowing down some interests, if you can start narrowing down some talents, see, interests are important, but talents, I think, are maybe more important, because you might be interested in something you just don't have abilities for. So, and then if you're good at something, then you can also decide to like it to a certain extent. And if you haven't been on this yet, don't just drift into an educational course. Time to grab hold. I'd say that's the biggest thing. Start being the driver of your own vehicle. You've been escorted through 12 years of high school, or through 12 years of education. You should have been grabbing the steering wheel already, but if you haven't yet, start now.
Mm-hmm. Mark?
I love John's suggestion about talking with people, because they're almost always going to say yes if you ask them for advice. And if I look back at when I was at that age, let's say grade 12, the world feels so intimidating, and there's people you respect in your community or in your church community, and you think, who am I that they would actually want to talk with me? But I think John's right. Most of them would be they think it's a privilege to sit down and talk with someone who's keen and willing to listen and ask really big questions. Like, if you were in my place today, what do you think are some career opportunities that would have great potential? Or if I want to stay in this community, or if I want to leave this community, or if I don't want to pursue post-secondary studies, what are some jobs that you think would still line up really well? And you're going to get so much better advice. My kids are constantly coming back from school telling me about these online programs that they have to fill in that tell them that they're going to be a marine biologist or that they're going to be a
I
teacher.
remember
And
those.
every time it's useless. And I hear their answers. I'm like, that totally doesn't line up with who they are. They kind of answer the questions in such a way that it steers an outcome. But when you talk face to face with somebody, they don't have anything to lose. They'll just give their advice. And I think that's the blessing of being in a church community. So that's a great place to start. And then I'd say just take a step. Don't overthink it. Sometimes we think we have to nail it or we worry about the cost. But I'd say just take any step, whether you're going to go to university or whether you're going to work. It's going to be a challenge. It's going to bring challenges. Move forward, be courageous. And then as you're going, you're going to get that experience, which will tell you pretty quickly, this is going well, or this is horrible. I'm going to pivot. And that's my last recommendation would be, don't hesitate to pivot. Sometimes we feel such a need to say, I'm going to become something, fill in the blank. And then we have to stick to that because we already told people we're going to be a teacher or something else. It's like, no, it's okay to pivot. I really wrestled with what to do. I was in a marketing program. It was in December. And so the semester was just about to end. And I ended up switching to a totally different institution on the other side of the country, totally different discipline, going into political science. And that was one of the best moves I ever made, going to the Laurentian Leadership Center in Ottawa. It changed the course of my whole life and career. So sometimes it's okay to pivot and don't worry about what people think about it or say about it.
Oh, that's great advice too. I think you just got to get out there and do something at the end of the day. I mean, there's that book from I think it's Kevin DeYoung, right? Do something, just do something. Like I read that a bunch of years ago, but it's just get out there and try something. And I think John, you mentioned this earlier too. That point about yes, your interests matter, but skills are actually more important. I would add on to that and say, yes, your interest can help direct you to a degree, but skills are acquired through hard work and repetition, and you should be seeking competency in whatever field you're going into, not just education. And now education can help with that competency, no doubt. But I think if we consider our example of kind of a talented but unsure 18-year-old, like go get a job and go work for someone. Like go talk to people in your local community. We have this like fantastic for any of our listeners who are part of a Reformed church community. There are many different mentors out there in your church that you can just go talk to. It seems like Marky said, intimidating, but I I think 99% of them, 100% probably, will talk to you and will give you that advice. And there are jobs out there, and there are also are people out there who will provide opportunities for a young, hungry person coming to them and saying, okay, well, like this kid doesn't know how to do anything yet, but they show the ability to learn and they're keen and they'll work hard and they can achieve competency in this area. And then once you do that, like I found that in my life, once you get good at something, you start to really love it. So like I sell doors for a living. That's not what I imagined I would be doing. My interest was in sales. So sales, just my mind is business. And then things just kind of snowball from there. You learn an industry, you learn what makes it tick, you learn what the problems are, you learn how to try to solve them. There's always more learning to go, but as soon as you get to a certain level, then you're like, oh, okay, I can do this. And then you build on that, and you find the next challenge, and you find the next challenge. And if you just get out there and do something, like you said, Mark, you can switch industries or you can switch opportunities. That's fine. But I think I would also caution against switching too soon too. Like it might take a year, it might take 2 years. Like you just have to give a significant amount of time to something in order to figure out if you could get good at it. And I think you need that patience, and that's hard to do in our age of social media where everything's quick clicks, right? So that was a bit of a rant right there, but I don't know. Do you disagree, John? Am I being young and naive in saying that, or do you think am I onto something there?
Well, one aspect that is sort of coming up, you have the advantage, that you're learning and getting paid. Like
Yes. Yeah.
that's an interesting way to explore things. That doesn't mean that the other options are bad, but if you're going to count the cost, and I think that's just a really important point to bring up, is when you're evaluating these things, there's costs that are involved. Obviously, there's the cost of tuition and all of that if you go to university, but there's also the cost of time. If you have a 4-year degree and you've instead decided to go get a job and you've spent 4 years developing yourself, yeah, in 4 years' time, if you've been in a business for 4 years and a college graduate comes in, which one of you is going to be better equipped? In some situations, you're going to be way better equipped. So there are costs in time. There are costs in really, are you developing skills? But they come in whatever situation, whether it's university, whether it's work. Hey, if you spent 4 years in one business, you did not spend 4 years doing a whole bunch of other things. So then you kind of went down a certain channel and you've limited some other possible options. Maybe you volunteered. It's a cost-free way to maybe experience something. Our soon-to-be premier or soon-to-be prime minister, his major qualification for his job is that he's been in politics all his life, volunteering at every political thing that he could do from, I think 14 onward. So this guy got a lot of on-the-job training, but he didn't pay for it. He didn't get paid for it. But volunteering is another option where you're going, okay, I'm not making money, but I'm not paying money. But you're not going to get the same kind of intensive training that you might get if you're on a job or you're at university. So all sorts of considerations that are worth spending time thinking through.
The other thing I just thought of quickly too, and maybe we touched on this in the podcast before, but the ability to work with or interact with people of different ages and experiences. Like, yes, if you go to a university, especially a public secular one, you're going to encounter people of a lot of different backgrounds, and that's good. That is healthy. That usually strengthens you as a person and helps you to, interact with the world in general and sharpen those articulation skills. But if you are working in an environment with people of a different age group, multiple different age groups, A, you can learn so much. And then B, you're going to know how to deal with all these different people of different ages as well, which is super important in the rest of your working life. So you're just getting more time to practice how to be in a working setting. I think that's super valuable. And then one quick little thing, John, on the volunteering thing that I've found helpful too over the years is in churches where I've been in, where if we don't have a small group, but they have the typical Bible study, if you go to a men's Bible study with men of different all ages too, that's like a great spot to meet guys and meet mentors that way. And you can, that's just a helpful tip I would share for anybody out there. But sorry, Mark, maybe I cut you off if you had some thoughts there. No, you're good.
I won't disagree with what you shared. I just maybe push back only in the angle of, if you're a young person right now, there's so much pressure to make money right away when they come out of high school with the cost of housing, for example. So then they see their peers who took the route of going in the trades, and they see how they're pulling in a pretty good income. They're starting to buy their vehicle that's, not an old rust bucket. And some of them a few years later are even getting a down payment on a house. It's like, that's pretty attractive. And especially if you're a guy and you're already dating, or you found the girl that you want to marry, it's like, you think your brain just logically concludes, I got to get moving forward. I need to start accumulating some capital. And then post-secondary studies seems like the biggest roadblock. It seems like an insurmountable hurdle when it comes to the rest of life. And so that's why I say, when I push against that, we can't only look at this practically or pragmatically, and we can, as guys do, we can be pretty good at looking at things just like practically. We need to look through this also through the lens of what God calls us to. And he keeps saying, seek first his kingdom and his righteousness, and all these things will be yours as well. And we need teachers, we need pastors, we need people to be pursuing post-secondary studies. So what can we do to not just inculcate in our youth this mentality that, well, you better save money really fast, but also there's needs in the world. God's given you skills. Try to fill those needs with what God has given you and trust that He'll provide. Speaking just for myself, I did this online calculator when we were first tackling this topic in the magazine. There was a very impressive program that was put online through some university. I can't remember which university. It was a calculated return on investment if you pursued different types of studies. And I put in master's degree in philosophy, and the return on investment was minus 1.8 million. It was about one of the worst that I saw. And I did my master's in political theory. I did my undergrad in philosophy. And that whole route along the way, people shook their heads. They're like, what are you going to do with that? What a waste. It's like basket weaving. And that's fair. I would similarly have questions if my own children were pursuing similar studies. And yet, I think we have to be careful how we talk about it, because do we want, for example, pastors, or if your church is having a synod, do you want elders who are capable of sitting around that table, able to work through those documents and have those discussions? Do we really want to be saying the right course is just the one that gets you the most money the fastest?
And can I give small pushback too? I'll just one point that you made. We do need elders. We do need teachers. I mean, we do need pastors. We do need teachers. As far as the people around the consistory room reading those documents, I'm thinking of my father and my father-in-law. Neither of whom had a degree, and both of whom would spend their spare change buying the next theological tome that they could get their hands on. We need more of that. So
yeah, that's a good point too. Which I didn't get the chance to go to it, but I caught the YouTube versions of the Strive Conference speeches, and that what Pastor Albazian was talking about in his speech there was, how do we use our spare time? And he brought up, I believe, that exact point you just mentioned there, John, too. That yeah, we gotta be using our time well. I know this is a podcast. We do this so that to help people get information if you don't like to read, but I would just put the plug in there again. Like, reading does matter, and it helps you become articulate. And if you aspire to be a leader of any sort in your church community, I think you have to be reading at least some books. I'm not saying you got to read a book a week or 20 books a year, or even just a couple, but reading is important, and I think that is a crucial skill that yeah, you're right. If it's all about money and we're just chasing that, which we shouldn't be, but we should be practical to a degree. We got to be careful to yeah, we don't want to swing too far the other way, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Because if you look at it where nobody was educated and there was a big push for education, and now we might be swinging back the other way, I think we got to be careful and regulate that a little bit too. Another topic in this space that we haven't really touched on is, if you do decide to go to university, there is the secular option, and then there is the Christian option, or various different Christian options. Maybe both of you guys can speak to your experiences. Did both of you go to secular universities, or was there any sort of Christian education involved in your post-secondary education? And then what do you make of the current landscape today, Christian versus secular? I'll go to Mark, and then we'll come back to John for a fiery rebuttal.
Yeah, I did both secular and Christian, and I do think the landscape has changed even since I've gone through both. The secular landscape, I think most of the listeners will already get that if you're doing a more practical program like business or technology of some kind, maybe the sciences, it's going to be a very different experience than if you're doing something much more open-ended or in the arts or in the humanities. And so it can be, and some of these stories were shared in the last issue or in one of the recent issues of Reform Perspective, different people sharing their experiences. And for some of them, I think the same is true for myself. It was very challenging being in a secular environment. and getting hit over the head with worldviews that were hostile to ours, and yet can only be thankful for that experience, because when you get raised in an environment that's surrounded by Christians, surrounded by a worldview that's similar to ours, you don't always grow too much, or it's difficult to make it your own. So for me, it was mostly a positive experience being in a secular setting. And at the same time, my caution would be that there are real temptations and trials that we often, I think, can get blindsided by, where we don't even think it'll be a challenge for us, and it's not until we're in a setting like that where we realize how difficult it is. For some, that might be the more intellectual side, the actual arguments that are being raised, but for others, it might be simply living on your own, surrounded by non-Christians. For myself, for a while, I was living in a city far away from the church community, far away from friends, far away from family, completely on my own. And your world changes very fast. And so how do we prepare not just for the actual arguments, let's say evolution or things related to sexual orientation, but how do we also prepare to live going so abruptly from a sheltered Christian environment to a completely non-sheltered, independent, secular environment?
Yeah, that's tricky. That is tricky. John?
Yeah, we have a school system that can be getting us ready, but it does need to get us ready for a hostile world. I went to a few secular institutions. I had in my journalism program a very friendly prof. In my university setting, I had profs coming after me. I was in a class of 200, the only person dumb enough to raise their hand when he asked if anybody was pro-life, and he was a UN legal scholar who, like, the guy was brilliant. And so then he's coming after me in class, and I wasn't ready for it. My Greek history guy, Greek classics, was a perverted, I wouldn't want any of my children near him. There's pro-choice this, evolutionary that. And I learned a lot, but I learned it from contentious situations. And I was very blessed to have a Christian Reformed chaplain who's very gracious to explain Canadian Reformed doctrine on so many of these different things to me. That university was big enough that it had a number of chaplains. I also had a good group of friends that we could talk through the different challenges we were getting. But yeah, I had friends who started off creationist and ended up not, because the prof had literally been bamboozled them, like was trying to trap them. So the dangers in a secular setting, I think, are only kind of worse. And maybe the most overt one would just be, if you see the punch coming, it's so easy. That's not the right analogy. It's very tempting to deny your faith if in a setting where, if you're going to speak up, you're going to get hit. And so just say what the prof wants you to say. Just get by. Just, it doesn't mean anything anyway. Well, what you write down is who you become. That's one of Jordan Peterson's shticks too. But I mean, the word is powerful, and so if you're ducking there, that's not a lesson you want to be learning, and you're paying to learn it again. I think the danger in a Christian university is that there is much more subtle pressures being brought to bear. I would love to go to a few different Christian universities where the profs are trustworthy and orthodox, and you can sit at their feet and know that they love the same Lord that you do. But then there are some institutions where that might only be true of some of the profs, and it might be very not true of some of the others. So there's a fellow, John West, had an article, 10 questions to ask when evaluating a Christian college. And he had one of them do all the teachers subscribe to a statement of faith. Okay, good. What is that statement of faith? Okay. Has anybody ever been kicked out on the basis of that statement of faith? And if the answer to that last one is no, then it doesn't matter that they subscribe to it. They don't actually hold to it. So, and how many members of the science department is skeptical of evolution? And what student groups are there? Do they have an LGBT club on this Christian campus? How many LGBT flags are in their profs' offices during June, during Pride Month? So, but in the Christian university, I think the biggest pressure would be, do the profs there think that God's word is good for you? Do they treat it as something that is relevant to all of life?
Okay, thanks, John, for that. So I guess on the going to university, Christian versus secular, if we look at it from the view of the parents, like the preparation is the key part to me. Like, how are you raising your kids? What kind of education are they getting from K to 12, both in the school or if you homeschool in the home? And also, even if you send your kids to school, the education they get at home as well. As parents with children that will be going to school sooner than my two very young daughters, how have you approached that over your years as parents? And do you have certain thoughts personally in terms of, I don't think I would send our kids to a Christian institution versus secular? Maybe I'll go to Mark for some of his thoughts, and then over to John.
I would be very open to my kids going to a Christian university, but John's questions that he raised about what kind of faculty do they have, what kind of program are they taking at that university, those are very important questions. And then also the cost. So a private university can be very expensive, and if they're going to pursue a degree and they don't have the savings to cover it, or a bursary or scholarship to cover it, and especially if they don't know what the end result is, then I would probably discourage it. But Levi Minderhout wrote a very glowing piece about his experience going to a Christian university south of the border. And I think if it is a great faculty, if you're surrounded by people who help you run the race and sharpen your skills, I think you can really, really flourish. And I would love to see Canada having more and more of those options. So yeah, quite open, but also very open to secular alternatives. And this is where what would matter most to me is if my child is truly plugged into a community outside of the school community in both settings, whether it's Christian or secular, that they're plugged into a Christian, so obviously a church, and friends that they view as their group. I was really struck by this in both secular and Christian contexts. First, when I was in a secular program, a very small class, and it was a marketing class, and this class was a bunch of keeners, and it's amazing how that they became their own best friends. Like the rest of the world was blocked out. They studied all their full day, and they partied together, and they lived together, and everything was about that class. So to be a member of that class and to study alongside of them, it's really hard to avoid that. It's possible to avoid that, but there's a pull to get brought into that. And similarly, I was in a Christian school where there's 17 of us living all in the same home. And this was the Laurentian Leadership Center there in Ottawa. And Sunday observance was very striking to me. It was very eye-opening to me. So all except one of the 17 were Christian. So you would expect Sunday would be quite a different day. Everyone would go off to church. For the first few weeks, maybe the majority went to a church, and it didn't take long. And I would say I was very much the minority. Myself and my good friend we had to go and seek out a faithful Reformed church. And that church ended up being such a blessing to us, this community through our studies. And as the semester went on, the other students not only stopped going to their churches, most of them, but some of them started tagging along with us. They wondered why we would disappear in the morning. We had to take transit to get there. It would take quite a while. And we wouldn't show up until late in the evening. They're like, I thought you were going to church. Where do you go? Like, well, we went to church and then someone invited us over for Sunday lunch, and then there's a second service, and then we play hockey, and then we got invited over for dinner, and then there was like a young people's gathering, and it was really neat. A bunch of our classmates ended up becoming just quite active in that church community and just coming along with us. So we had something very special that other Christians didn't have, and I think we can take that for granted. But so important for our children, for anyone considering going to university, to have that firm basis, that firm foundation, especially if they're away from their family.
Was that true for you as well, John, or have you seen that in your life where people go off to university and if they have that anchor of a good anchor in a positive sense of a good church community, holds them steady through tough times?
Yeah, I think I grew up in Edmonton, and so almost everybody I knew who was going to university still had home life, same church um, that they were a member of. So there was a rootedness. The fellows that I actually saw have the most difficulties were actually not Canadian Reformed, but from other churches that were conservative and believed a lot of the same things we did, but were just a little bit light. I don't know to say it, but and it was actually probably their lack of um, Christian foundation on the church front that left them vulnerable.
Okay. And then on the points that Mark raised about, yeah, just when you're raising your kids, what are some thoughts that go through your mind as a parent with your daughters sending them off to school at some point?
Yeah. So I got three daughters, and um, I uh, I don't know what careers they might end up having, or whether they're going to be working outside the home as well. Um, but I want them to be um, educated moms, for example, and they the options here are not the local options here are not the sort that you would want anybody to go to unless they have a reason to be there. So if my daughter wants to be a nurse, great. Here's a program. Endure it, get through it, take what you need from it, but it's not a place you go for joy and fulfillment. They're actively attacking you in your classes. Um, but the dream is that there are a few classical liberal colleges that I'd love them to go to for a year. That's just probably what we could afford because it's not, they are expensive. But Hillsdale, New St. Andrews, I think there's a less classical liberal, but Grove College, it's solidly grounded. Most of the people there are really overtly Christian or still pretty solidly so, and they learn foundations of Western literature from an explicitly and solidly Christian perspective. They're learning how to debate. They're learning how to write, and they walking out of there. They read a stack of books this big, and they know how to speak Latin now. And these are guys who are coming up with their coming out of there with both fists ready to defend, ready to attack. And so I'd love it if that was a possibility. And if it isn't, then I'd be strongly encouraging them to take on something like Colson Fellowship.
Hmm. I love that. Are there a lot of programs like that? Or are there some programs like that, like the 1 and 2 year type programs? Because I think if we go back to the cost and the talking about debt from a money perspective, but I think the biggest cost is the time, like the opportunity lost if you make a poor choice and waste your time. Like, are there those 1 and 2 year programs available?
Yeah, so the ones that I'm thinking of are 4-year programs, but we'd have the money for one. So it's just go there, get the experience, and then from then on, it's you've now been exposed to a whole other world, and now if you want to keep going, it's up to you. Maybe you can find the part-time job to get you through it, but if not, maybe you can just pick up the books and study your way.
Hmm. Do you guys know of any, like, obviously there's lots of scholarships out there in general, but in our reform community, if we zoom back out and just kind of take a big picture look. So, like I was saying earlier, if we started out when I say we all, when the Dutch reformed, immigrated here, many people were not formally educated at a high level. So there was a real big push for that education. Now, kind of in today's day and age, with the way things have gone, it's swinging back the other way. Well, we got to be careful not to go too far in that direction either. But education is, if you want to get really good stuff, you probably have to go to the States. There are a few Canadian options perhaps as well. But to get some of that top tier education, you might have to head down south, and to do so is expensive. So where I'm going with this is, do you know of any reform scholarship opportunities if you're a young person listening to this who says, hey, yeah, I'd love to do a 4-year would be fantastic, but even if there is a 1 or 2 year program somewhere, but it's so bloody expensive, it's not even realistic. Are there opportunities out there? And if not, what do you think of the idea of if more of us are going into the trades and making a good living in that, setting up some scholarships where we can help support the teachers and the pastors and the lawyers and whatnot? Because I mean, maybe apart from the lawyers, although even though they probably do a lot of pro bono work too, if you're going to be a pastor, you're going to be a teacher, like you're not making much money. So if you're taking on all that debt, it's not very sustainable from a cost perspective. So what do you think about that idea? I'm very long-winded. Go ahead, Mark.
Yeah, I was blessed when I was considering options. I didn't think I would go to a Christian university because I had to fund it all myself. And there was a foundation where some generous folk, essentially, you could apply to this foundation and they would help cover the difference between the cost of private and Christian university. And they supported me for, I think it was 2 or 3 semesters. And between that and some other angles, it worked. Like that's what made it possible for me to end up getting my undergraduate degree from a Christian university. But I'm not sure that it's necessarily worth it for most people to pay the costs that go along with some of these American schools that you talk about. It's massive costs, like 40,000 plus per year, and you're talking minimum 4 years, depends what program you're doing. But that's a massive cost. I think what I would encourage is scholarships is generally going to be the best option. So try, if you're in grade 11, 12, try to get the very best marks you can and then apply for scholarships. It's amazing how good some of the scholarships are to various schools, Christian and secular. And sometimes they'll waive a substantial amount of the tuition. So I think that would be the best bet for most people. And that's true in Canada just as much as it is in the US. I'll just say something I didn't realize is the further up you go in education. So when you go from undergrad to graduate school, there's way more money available. And that's the reason I was able to do more studies as well. The government of Canada is pretty generous with research projects. So ironically, the government paid for very generously, gave money to me to write about a Judeo-Christian account of human dignity in Canadian law. And I always smile when I think of that because we used some of those arguments in our work with ARPA and the Supreme Court on the euthanasia issue. It's like I got that thanks in part to that government giving a nice, generous scholarship. And it's not the case that everybody gets one, but a lot of people, if you're going to make it into a master's program, a lot of the people will get a good scholarship. So I'd say look for those kinds of opportunities. There's more of that than people realize. Yeah, I'll leave it there.
Yeah. The only specific thing I'll direct people to is there's all sorts of possibilities for money in the field of education. We're all looking to encourage people to take up teaching, and so it doesn't seem to matter where you are, what school society you're part of. There's some money set aside for scholarships for people who are interested in teaching. And of course, the Canadian Reformed Teachers College is one of those facilities you can go to and just learn. And you're not fighting with your profs, except maybe a little bit fun. But
yeah, okay. Well, I think we've covered quite a amount of ground here. I guess just hearing both of you say that, though, it still it leaves something in my mind of, is there a hole in the Canadian education market for a good reformed short-term education option, 1 or 2 years. Smells like an RP Academy, perhaps, in the future, but maybe I'll just tease the listeners with that. And if you're interested, send us a note, because that could be a future project. Okay, just to wrap things up, I'll throw to both of you for kind of your final thoughts. And again, keeping in mind parents, keeping in mind students, prospective students, just some general advice with approaching this topic of what should I do with my life following high school? How do I apply the principles that most importantly God has given us, and to make some of these important decisions? How do we steward our time well? How do we steward our money well? Overall, some general advice given your many, not many, but your many years of experience. We'll go to John, and then we'll give Mark the close there.
Yeah, maybe I'll mention one book that covers a lot of what I would like to say. It's called Skip College. It's got contributions by 9 different people. It's by Connor Boyack. I'm not saying that everybody should skip college. I am saying everybody should read this book, because the case it makes is essentially that whatever you do, do it with intent. And not everybody in the book is a Christian. I think it's Mormons. There might be an atheist. I think there is a Christian or two. But they all agree that you should steward your time, your money, and your talents. Whether they say it quite that way or not, they all agree on that point. Very biblical point. And so that is the thing. I drifted into first-year university, and it was a waste for me. But what if I had chosen to set myself up on first-year university? It would have been a whole different ballpark. So be intentional. Use the time, talent, and money God has given you to get the best return.
Yeah, for myself, in this podcast, I've made the case a bit more on the pro-university side, partly knowing that both of you would push up against that. So just to be fair to that, but along with what John just shared, I don't really think it's about to go to university or not to go to university, to go to a Christian one or not to go to a Christian one. I do think fundamentally it's about service. So stewardship, John spoke about our time, our funds, the talents that God's given us, and I'd say God calls each of us to serve, to love Him, to love our neighbor, and there can be many different reasons that are holding us back from pursuing post-secondary studies. It could be fear, it could be a desire for greed, wanting to have more money or more time, more opportunities. Could be not wanting to leave something that's comfortable and safe. All sorts of reasons. Some of them can be really good, and I think we need to just, each of us, search our own hearts. What's motivating us to do what we do? And that's not just when we are in grade 11 and 12. It's also if we've been serving in a job for 20 years already. So some of our listeners might be in a trade and they've been doing it for a long time. They might also be serving very faithfully in a setting. And yet I'd say we can all keep growing. Education really is lifelong, and it doesn't necessarily have to be a formal means like a university that we enter, but a willingness to read a book that we would not normally read, a willingness to talk about a topic that we're uncomfortable with, just to learn, to hear somebody else, to hear what they have to say about it. Actually, it's like real talk. So I think what you're living out, Lucas, with this podcast is, I think, something we're all called to, is to keep growing in our walk with the Lord, and then have a heart, a posture of humility, of service, so that if God is calling us to do something, even if it's not attractive to us necessarily, that we'd be willing to consider taking those steps just to serve.
Wise words. Thanks, Mark. Appreciate that. Yeah, I think just to close it out, there are many options before you. There are many ways to serve, and I think the focus on service is a good one. You should be wise and look at all your options and be practical to a degree, but yeah, there's many paths out there and many opportunities to serve. And I think, not that I've done anything a long time, as I'm a youth still. But yeah, just with every passing year, I find that it's just, yeah, you set out to do something and you would like to, at least this is true for me, you like to achieve a goal, right? You make a goal, you like to achieve a goal. And that's good. And in doing so, you learn new skills and you gain a higher level of competency in whatever the task is. But really along the way, it's the impact you can have on the people around you and how you can serve those people and the difference you can make in their lives. And yeah, I think that brings God the most glory and honor. And the more we can do that, the more we're serving Him and living out our calling as Christians. So yeah, hopefully that wasn't too much on a soapbox to end this episode, but it's supposed to be real talk, and these are real problems. So I appreciate both of you gentlemen joining me for this episode. Appreciate all the listeners listening, and yeah, let us know what you thought about this. This was the kind of the home team just getting together and hashing it up on an important topic, a topic that we covered recently in the magazine. So if you don't get the magazine or you haven't had a chance to read it yet, I would encourage you to go check it out. If you don't have a copy, go to your local Reformed church. I think we send out well over 10,000 copies now. So if it's not near you, contact us, let us know. We'll make sure you can get a copy. We're here to, share God's truth with as many people as we can. So thank you again. If you have any questions or concerns, please email reformrealtalk@gmail.com. And until next time, keep having real talk.
Hey everybody, thanks for listening. We hope you enjoyed this episode. Just a quick shout out to our sponsor for this episode, Redeemer University. You can check them out at redeemer.ca. Thanks to them for making this episode possible.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Real Talk. In partnership with Reform Perspective, this show is created and produced by Tyler Vanderwood, Lucas Holtfleur, and Mariah Tamiga. We really appreciate you taking the time to listen or watch the show. If you have any feedback for us or ideas for future guests or topics, please let us know. You can reach us at reformedrealtalk@gmail.com. Be sure to also follow us on social media. You can search Reformed Real Talk on any of the platforms. We should come right up. Also, leave us a review, preferably a 5-star one, on any of the podcast platforms. That would be greatly appreciated. That's all for now, folks. Keep having real talk.